Your Majesty, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you so much for honoring me and inviting me here, not just for me personally, but for honoring water quality this year. As you know, we talk about water is a life, but water quality to me is health. So without further ado, let me talk about waterborne diseases. Here we have two iconic waterborne pathogens, cholera and typhoid. I chose 1993 to display on the map the cholera cases of disease because that's when cholera, as Dr. Caldwell knows very well, who did much of the investigation, came over to Central and South America and spread throughout that continent very, very rapidly. So it moves rapidly. But beyond that is typhoid. Typhoid is also a pathogen that we've had for many years, that we've known about, a very big problem in the Great Lakes before we started treating our water and treating our wastewater. We still have quite a bit of typhoid disease throughout the US, and it's now picking up antibiotic resistance. That top panel is a parasite, Cryptosporidium, emerged on the scene in the 90s, really, late 80s and 90s in humans. And it's spread throughout the world. It's a particular problem for AIDS patients and those with immunocompromised states. And so we can actually map some of the impact on those sensitive populations. And the last map there is rotavirus and deaths in children due to this particular virus. So throughout the world, in this day and age, we still are experiencing waterborne disease that we should be able to control. Now, there are hundreds of different pathogens that are in sewage that we need to think about controlling and using wastewater treatment as one of the barriers to safety. I work with three groups: the viruses, the little nano bioparticles. They're so small you can only see them under the electron microscope. I work with bacteria, a whole range, of course, typhoid, cholera, but there's salmon, there's E. coli 0157, Campylobacter. Many different types of bacteria are concerned with waterborne disease. And then, of course, the parasites, Giardia and Cryptosporidium. Now, we think of these as just causing severe diarrhea, but we now know that these agents cause many other illnesses. We'll get respiratory illness, there's chronic liver disease, there's heart infections, there's central nervous system infections. So the impact is quite significant. It's well beyond diarrhea. Now, I'm a big believer in developing water diagnostics, new diagnostics, but it doesn't mean that they all have to be high tech. We do need low-tech systems that we can take out into remote settings. And I remember my student took these bag systems out into Nicaragua. She had a system where you didn't need an incubator. You were going kilometers between wells to sample in this community that was experiencing quite a bit of illness. She had her system on a donkey. One of the donkeys got away and it fell off, but this was fairly robust and only lost a couple of samples. So it's pretty good. You see, you can go out in areas and find which wells were contaminated, what should then the community do about it. We were also able to take samples and bring them back and use the high-tech methods in centralized laboratories, the high-tech methods where you could look at the DNA. Where was the contamination coming from? That's always the question we get. And with that DNA method, they could show that it was coming from cattle and not from humans. And so they could look at ways to keep the cattle away from the wells, and especially in rainfall events. So both low-tech and high-tech novel methodologies are needed. Now, I think I've worked in environmental virology and worked on human viruses. But with the new technologies, these metagenomic technologies, which come out of the development of systems to look at the human genome, we've been able to look very broadly at the types of viruses that are in water. This was a ballast water study, sampling ballast from ships that was picked up throughout the ocean, from Singapore and from Long Beach, clear across the world. We found three virus pathogens, one in shrimp, one in fish, and one in humans. And we could show that those Ds there are where the diseases had shown up in humans. The H is where we found it in the harbor, and the B is where we found this virus in the ballast water. So these shrimp viruses, these fish viruses, and the human viruses are being spread through water and through ballast water. So it really opened my eyes really to what I'm calling the biohealth of the planet. And we need to think more broadly about diseases and the health of the planet. I do think that water security is at the core of sustainability. I think it's connected to food security and economic growth and the theme of this conference. And so the idea that all living things are affected by water quality, and we should be looking at that more broadly, thinking about that biohealth, because we are affecting the whole planet. And if we don't do that, how do we reach sustainability? So, and finally, I'd like to mention that I do think that education and cross-training is going to be necessary. This is people in my lab. We had a visiting PhD student from India, from Mumbai there, a student from Singapore, student from Kenya, a student from Iran, from Korea. These are young people that are all learning about water and water science. They're all going to go back to their own locales to build their own capacity, their own lab capacity, their diagnostics, learning to work in interdisciplinary groups. And so I'm a very big supporter of that effort into the future as we meet these challenges. So again, Your Majesty, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you and start off this interesting session.